The wind moved slowly across the open land, carrying dust and the smell of dry grass. A wide ranch stood far from the town, quiet except for the soft sound of horses in the stable. Luke Harper, a tall and quiet cowboy, walked through the barn doors as the evening sun spread gold light across the sky. He had been alone for a long time, living with only his animals and silence. His days were all the same: work from sunrise to sunset, eat simple meals, then sit on the porch watching the stars until sleep finally came. Luke had once dreamed of a busy ranch with laughter, love, and family. But life had other plans. Years ago, he lost his parents to sickness, and later, the woman he wanted to marry left for the city, chasing dreams that didn't include him. Since then, Luke had built high walls around his heart. He spoke to no one unless necessary, kept his distance from the townspeople, and preferred the company of his horses. People in town called him the silent cowboy. That evening, while closing the gate, Luke noticed movement near the fence. He reached for his hat and squinted toward the dusty road. A young woman was walking slowly toward the ranch, her steps tired and weak. Her dress was plain and worn from travel, and she carried a small bag that looked almost empty. When she reached the fence, she stopped, unsure if she should call out. Luke studied her for a moment, expecting her to ask for directions, but instead she spoke softly, her voice trembling slightly. "Sir, please. I'm looking for work. I can cook, clean, or take care of animals. I'll do anything. Just give me a chance." Her words hit Luke like a cold wind. He hadn't expected anyone to come to his ranch, especially not a young woman alone at dusk. He didn't like surprises. "You from around here?" he asked in his deep, calm voice. She shook her head. "No, sir. I came from the east. I thought there would be work in town, but no one will hire me." Luke frowned and looked away, pretending to adjust the fence post. "You shouldn't be wandering this far. These lands aren't safe for strangers, especially women traveling alone." "I know," she said quietly, "but I didn't have a choice." Luke sighed, wiping the sweat from his forehead. "You'd best keep going before night falls. There's a town about 20 miles east. Maybe someone there can help you." Her eyes fell to the ground. "I just came from there," she whispered. "They told me to leave when they saw I had no references. I haven't eaten since yesterday." Her voice broke at the end, but she didn't cry. She just stood still, her thin frame trembling slightly from exhaustion. Luke felt something stir in his chest, something he hadn't felt in years. Pity, maybe, or concern. But he quickly pushed it away. He had learned long ago that helping strangers only brought trouble. "You should go," he said again, though his tone was softer now. The girl nodded slowly, clutching her bag tighter. "I understand." She turned to walk away, her steps unsteady in the dust. Luke watched her for a few seconds, then turned back toward the barn, trying to ignore the heaviness in his chest. But when he reached the door, he stopped. He could still see her figure in the distance, shrinking against the horizon as the sky darkened. A lonely figure walking nowhere. He clenched his jaw and muttered to himself, "Foolish girl." Before he could stop himself, he called out, "Wait!" She turned, surprised. Luke walked toward her, boots crunching in the dirt. "You said you haven't eaten?" he asked. She nodded. "Since yesterday morning." He sighed deeply. "Fine, there's hay in the barn. You can sleep there for the night. I'll bring you something to eat. But you leave by sunrise, understand?" The girl's eyes widened. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Then she nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you so much." "Don't thank me," Luke muttered, turning back toward the barn. "Just stay out of trouble." She followed him quietly, her footsteps soft behind his. Inside the barn, the smell of hay and horses filled the air. Luke pointed to a corner near the empty stall. "You can rest there. There's a blanket on the haystack. It's old but clean." She nodded gratefully. "This is more than I could ever ask for." Luke handed her a small loaf of bread and a flask of water. "Eat this. I'll check on the horses." She sat down, clutching the food with shaking hands. "Thank you, Mr. Harper," he said shortly. "Luke Harper." "Thank you, Mr. Harper." He nodded and walked away, pretending not to hear the quiet thank you again as she began to eat. Later that night, the ranch was still. The stars shone brightly over the plains and the sound of crickets filled the air. Luke sat on his porch watching the night sky. His mind kept returning to the girl in the barn. There was something about her that didn't fit the usual story of a lost traveler. Her eyes had carried pain, yes, but also courage, a kind of strength that comes only from someone who has been hurt but refuses to break. He leaned back in his chair and muttered, "What's your story, girl?" But no one answered. Inside the barn, the girl, Emily, lay awake, staring at the wooden beams above her. The night was cold, but for the first time in days she felt safe. She whispered softly to herself, "It's just one night. Emily, tomorrow you'll figure something out." Her mind drifted to the city she had left behind, the people who had promised her work, and the cruel man who had lied to her. She had run as far as she could, hoping to start over somewhere no one knew her name. But running came with fear. Fear of being found, fear of sleeping alone, fear of the future. Still, tonight she wasn't alone. Somewhere outside, a quiet cowboy had given her kindness when the world had given her none. Morning came with soft light streaming through the cracks in the barn walls. Emily woke to the sound of footsteps and turned to see Luke carrying a tin cup of coffee and another piece of bread. "You're up early," he said. She smiled faintly. "Didn't sleep much. It's hard when everything feels new." He placed the cup beside her. "Eat before you go. You'll need your strength." "Thank you, Mr. Harper," she said again, standing up and brushing the hay from her skirt. Luke studied her quietly. She looked even smaller in the morning light, her face pale but her eyes bright with determination. He saw the same spark of bravery he'd noticed last night. She was clearly running from something, but she didn't seem broken, just lost. He wanted to ask her questions, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he said, "If you head east, you'll find the road to the next town. Stay on it, don't wander off," she nodded. "I will." For a moment, neither of them moved. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the sound of a horse neighing softly. Then Emily took her bag and walked toward the gate. Luke followed at a distance, stopping near the fence. As she reached the road, she turned around. "Mr. Harper," she said softly, "I'll never forget your kindness." Luke shifted uncomfortably. "Just be careful out there," she smiled sadly. "I'll try." He watched her walk away until she disappeared into the golden horizon. Something inside him twisted painfully. He told himself it was none of his concern, that he had done his part. But deep down, he knew her story wasn't over. That night, he couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, tired, brave, and grateful. The words she had said echoed in his mind. "I'll never forget your kindness." He didn't know why those words mattered so much, but they did. Because for the first time in years, the lonely cowboy who had shut his heart to the world found himself wishing for something more than silence. He didn't know her past and he didn't know her future. But one thing was certain. Her arrival had stirred something inside him that had long been asleep. And though he didn't yet understand it, fate had just placed a new chapter of his life on that dusty road, wearing a torn dress and carrying hope in her eyes. The next morning, Luke Harper tried to focus on his work, but his thoughts refused to stay quiet. He fixed the fence, fed the horses, and carried hay, yet his mind kept drifting back to the girl who had walked away at sunrise. He told himself she was probably fine by now, maybe halfway to another town. Still, he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in his chest. Something about the way she had looked at him when she said goodbye stayed in his mind. It wasn't just sadness. It was the kind of look that said she had no one left in the world. By afternoon, the sky had turned gray and wind started to rise. Luke was in the barn checking on the animals when he heard a sound outside. It was faint at first, a soft tapping on wood. He turned and froze. Standing near the gate, drenched in rain and covered in dust, was Emily. She looked exhausted and scared. "What happened?" Luke asked, stepping closer. Her voice trembled. "I tried to go east, like you said, but I didn't get far. I saw a man on the road, a man I know. He's been following me since I left the city." Luke's eyes darkened slightly. "Did he see you come here?" "I don't think so," she said, shaking her head. "I hid behind some rocks until he passed. Then the rain started and I came back because I didn't know where else to go." For a long moment, Luke didn't say anything. The wind howled through the open barn door and the smell of rain filled the air. He looked at her, thin, trembling, frightened, and felt something harden inside him. "You did right coming back," he said quietly. "No one's going to hurt you here." Emily lowered her head. "I don't want to cause trouble. I'll leave in the morning if it's safer." "You're not leaving," Luke said firmly. Her eyes lifted in surprise. "But you told me—" "I know what I said," he interrupted, his voice steady but gentle. "That was before I knew you were being hunted." "You can't face that alone," she swallowed hard. I don't want to be a burden. He gave a small, tired smile. You're not. He helped her inside and gave her one of his old coats. The sleeves were too long, but it was warm. He set a plate of stew in front of her while she sat quietly by the fire. The sound of rain hitting the roof filled the room. For a while, neither spoke. Finally, Emily whispered, "You don't have to do this for me." Luke looked up from his cup. "I'm not doing this out of pity." "Then why?" she asked softly. He leaned back in his chair, thinking. "Because it's not right for a woman to fight the world alone." "And because—" He stopped himself. The words felt heavy on his tongue. "Because I don't like the idea of you disappearing into the storm." Emily's eyes softened, and for the first time she smiled. A small, fragile smile that warmed the quiet room. "You're a good man, Mr. Harper," he chuckled under his breath. "Haven't heard anyone say that in years." That night she slept in the spare room of the ranch house instead of the barn. Luke stayed awake longer than usual, sitting by the fire thinking about her. He didn't know her full story, but every part of him wanted to keep her safe. When morning came, the storm had passed. The land looked fresh, washed clean by rain. Luke stepped outside to saddle his horse, but before he could, he heard Emily's voice behind him. "Mr. Harper," she said quietly, "I think I should leave today. I don't want to bring danger here." He turned to face her. "Where would you go?" She hesitated. "Anywhere. I'll keep walking until I find a place." He shook his head. "No, you won't last a week alone." "That man will find you." "I can't stay forever," she said. Luke stared at her for a moment, his jaw tight, his eyes full of something she couldn't read. "You could," he finally said. She frowned softly. "What do you mean?" He stepped closer, his voice calm but sure. "Stay here, not as a stranger or a guest." "Stay as my wife." Emily blinked, shocked. "What?" I said, "Marry me," he repeated. "Right now." Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. "Mr. Harper, you don't even know me," he nodded. "You're right. I don't know everything. But I know what kind of person you are. You're brave, honest, and kind. You could have lied to me or stolen from me last night, but you didn't. That tells me more than words ever could." Tears welled in her eyes. "Why would you marry someone like me?" "You could have anyone." He gave a faint smile. "That's not true. I stopped looking a long time ago. But maybe I was waiting for someone who still believes in decency, even after being hurt." Emily's voice trembled. "You're asking me to marry you just so I'll be safe?" "I'm asking because I want you to have a place in this world," Luke said. "A name, a home. And maybe because I'm tired of eating alone." For a moment there was only silence. The wind brushed through the trees and the horses moved restlessly in the distance. Emily looked down at her hands, then back up at him. "What if I say yes?" she asked softly. "Then I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret it." Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time they weren't from fear. Slowly she nodded. "Then yes," she whispered. "I'll marry you." Luke's chest rose with a deep breath, like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. "All right, then," he said quietly. That afternoon, under the wide open sky, Luke and Emily stood by the old oak tree beside the ranch house. There was no preacher, no music, and no crowd, just two people and the endless land around them. Luke had found an old silver ring that had belonged to his mother. He placed it on Emily's finger as he said the simple words, "I'll take care of you for as long as I live." Emily's hands trembled as she replied, "And I'll stand by you no matter what comes." Their vows were soft, almost carried away by the wind, but they were real. When it was done, Luke looked at her and smiled for the first time in years, a real smile that reached his eyes. That evening, the two sat on the porch as the sun set over the horizon. The sky was painted orange and pink, and the air smelled of wild grass. Emily leaned against the wooden rail, watching the light fade. "I still can't believe this," she said quietly. Luke took off his hat, resting it beside him. "Life doesn't always wait for us to be ready," he said. "Sometimes it just happens." She turned to him, her eyes warm. "Do you ever regret helping me?" He shook his head slowly. "No, you gave me something I didn't know I was missing, a reason to care again." The next days passed peacefully. Emily helped around the ranch, cooking simple meals and tending to the garden. Luke found himself talking more than he had in years. He taught her how to feed the horses, fix fences, and ride a horse without fear. She learned quickly and laughed often, a sound that filled the quiet ranch with life again. At night, they would sit by the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes just listening to the wind. Emily often caught Luke staring at her with a soft look in his eyes, the kind that said he still couldn't believe she was real. Weeks later, people in the nearby town began to whisper about the quiet cowboy who suddenly wasn't alone anymore. Some called it strange. Others said it was fate. But Luke didn't care what anyone thought. For the first time in years, his home felt alive. One evening, Emily stood by the window watching the stars and said, "You saved me, Mr. Harper." Luke smiled gently. Maybe we saved each other. And he was right. From that day on, they were never apart. The man who once refused a girl's plea for work had instead given her a lifetime of safety and love. And the girl who had nowhere to go found her forever home, not through luck or wealth, but through a cowboy's quiet promise made under the wide and endless sky.